Welcome back. This is part 2 on the lecture on graphic design. So from here we're mostly just going to semi-historically go through a number of graphic designers and look at their work, and I might cover a few other issues as we're going along. So we've actually seen this piece once before, but I wanted to just show it again because I think it is a great example of really successful advertising and a successful use of graphic design. And also because I want to emphasize that thinking about negative space and about page space, like using as much white page as possible, is always is a major part about thinking about graphic design, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, because saving ink is always a concern. So Paul Rand is on the list of graphic designers that I wanted to show you, and one of the reasons is because he is considered sort of the genius of logo design, and he's often noted as being the graphic designer who, especially in terms of his logo and corporate identity type work, is closest to being voiceless, meaning that every time Paul Rand worked on a job, worked for a client, he really kind of like shifted his aesthetic ideas to match what the goals were for that client. And then we have some more graphic designers who are also like Otto Aker especially was influenced by the Swiss school, and thinking about kind of strict grids. But I also wanted to include here Herb Lublin, in part because type design, right, starts to become a really important part of the field, especially connected with the Swiss school, the development of Helvetica. So you have one field which is called typography, which is the use of a type set, but there's another field called type or type design. Or a typographic designer, and their job is to create the typeset itself, and that's in a way kind of like system design. Speaking of system design, another important part that graphic designers play in the world is designing information display. And here Massimo Vignelli is a great graphic designer on a number of fronts, but he was especially well thought of in terms of ability to design full systems for companies, and his very thoughtful way he dealt with system design. And this map of the New York subway system is a great example of that because of its clarity. How because it's such a complicated thing to understand. Anyone who's ever taken the subway knows it's really a very complicated thing to figure out and understand. And here he's simplifying it, decreasing scale where it needs to, right? This space should actually be going much greater distance out, but he's scaling things to fit them all together so that you can understand and see them. He's reducing any complication in the lines of any meandering that is unnecessary visually. And information display is critically important part of our world. Edward Tufte wrote a whole book about how information display, the poor use of graphic design, was a major contributor to the Challenger space shuttle disaster. And in our contemporary world, the graphic designer who figures out the absolute best way to create a medical chart for hospitals that communicates as most perfectly visually will save lives. Saul Bass, also a extremely influential graphic designer, and most well known for his work on movies, not only movie posters but also the movie animations that went with a lot of these campaigns. Milton Glaser, and especially well known for his I Love New York campaign. I included Michael Beirut in here both because I think he's an excellent designer, but he also has done has a career that's really kind of focused on corporate identity and really helping companies figure that out. And I think you can see that from his work, but also in packaging design. And that's an important part in graphic design as well. Paula Scher has had an extremely successful and very diverse career, and if for nothing else, just for her, City Card, Citibank logo design, pretty impressive. Chip Kidd is most well known. Chip Kidd works in the publishing industries, just so pretty much all of his work is although this Rolling Stone is a magazine cover, but almost all of his work is book publishing or book covers. And Neville Brody is also extremely well respected graphic designer. Lastly, I want to talk about David Carson, and actually David Carson and then one more. And the reason why I think David Carson is an important graphic designer to know about is that he was part of this trend. For most of the history of graphic design has always been about clarity and simplification, reduction, over and over again. And David Carson really started to, among with some other graphic designers, really fight against that and to say, sometimes communication requires a lack of clarity or requires ambiguity. And so my last graphic designer is Stefan Sagmeister. And I'm including him in part because he's a really interesting, cool kind of person, and because he's a very talented graphic designer, but also because in a lot of his campaigns, him and his firm have done things that are very, very much akin to installation art, feel very contemporary art, and I like the way that he's kind of brought graphic design in a way back to studio art, or maybe the other way around, or just trying to play with what is the difference between graphic design and studio art. And they made this project called the Happiness Project, where it was at first just a series of experimentations, and then it became this exhibition, and then also a film, and it was like an interactive exhibition. Anyway, he seems like a very interesting guy, and if we had more time, we could talk a little bit more about him. But I think that is the end of our lecture for now.